What's up guys, I'm BTC. Yesterday I told you about the best DPS in the game, which is Hanzo. If you haven't watched that video yet, you can go and check it out. But today I want to talk to you about the best current healer in the game, who could also be considered one of the best DPS at the same time, and that would be Baptiste. Now before I go into all of the reasons for this, I want to show you something because sometimes seeing this is a little bit better than just hearing it. This is a little demonstration of how much damage each character is able to do and how quickly they can break through an Orisa barrier using only normal attacks. Now that was a little fast, but if you pause it, you can see that Baptiste was able to destroy the barrier first. This is kind of ridiculous. I realize that Soldier 76 has the Helix and he could use that in order to destroy the barrier, but that isn't necessarily the best use of it. McCree could roll and reload a little bit faster, but it would still be about the same speed as Baptiste, and for Ashe, well, that's about as fast as it gets for her because using her abilities is often more likely to slow down the barrier destruction as opposed to speeding it up. So we're looking at a support character that's able to do more damage and destroy barriers faster than many of the similar style hit scan DPS characters can. And of course, if you throw Baptiste's ultimate into the mix, it just becomes absolutely ridiculous how fast he can destroy the barriers in the game. The point I'm trying to make here is that Baptiste does a whole lot of damage, and this is despite the fact that he's also a very good healer with one of the best abilities in the game. The Biotic Launcher will heal at 60 per, and it's in a 3-meter radius at a rate of 1 per 0.8, and if you ignore reloading, that's about 75 healing per second, and considering that it hits multiple teammates, that is pretty good. Remember, Mercy only heals one target at a time at 50 healing per second. Moira was just nerfed down to 65 healing per second, but it's also close range, and it's on a resource meter. So Baptiste has some pretty good healing in addition to that damage. Is it any wonder why Baptiste is now the #1 pick on the competitive ladder? This is the list of the top 10 characters on the ladder right now. There is still some lingering double barrier stuff with Orisa and Sigma, but as I talked about yesterday, Hanzo has skyrocketed in the pick rate as he is the best DPS in the game. Reinhardt's also made a pretty big rise in the pick rate. There are some other tanks like Zarya and Roadhog that are also being used a decent amount. They're not in the top 10, but it seems like the tank combination is still kind of up in the air. But when you're looking at the healers, it looks like Zenyatta's moved up obviously a little bit. Ana has as well. Moira just basically dropped like a rock, and she's not really being used at the upper bracket level that much anymore. But, you know, #1 spot, Baptiste right there. This is because barriers have become a lot weaker, and it means that Baptiste is even more useful, as you saw how quickly he can destroy those barriers, and his abilities are just incredibly strong on top of that. And we'll talk about those more in a second, but it's more than just that. In case you didn't know, Baptiste can attack and heal at the same time. This isn't unique because obviously Zenyatta can attack while the Harmony Orb is out, and Brigitte needs to attack in order to activate her Inspire passive, but Baptiste has a huge amount of healing, and he also does really good damage. So being able to use both of them at the same time is very strong. Now, if you try to just hold down both of the buttons, it doesn't really work that well, and it's not the smoothest that you'll see, and you'll end up with these little delays in your healing where you can tell that there's like an extra half a second or something getting thrown in there. It's like, well, you know, it's a little bit delayed. However, if you hold down the right click to constantly heal, then you can tap the left click in order to attack, and what you're doing is you're essentially weaving in or animation canceling your healing with Baptiste's primary attack. It does take a little bit of practice in order to get used to this, but it's one of those things where if you do it enough, then it's just going to start happening automatically as you're playing the game. You won't even need to think about it. You just hold down your right click to heal, and you're just going to quickly tap your attack in between. Now, realistically, you cannot attack and heal at the same time and expect to maintain 100% effectiveness with both. However, there's very little downside into just tapping the attack button as you're trying to heal the team. Yeah, you're gonna miss quite a bit on enemy players, but any damage that you do that happens to land is going to be bonus damage that otherwise you wouldn't have had, and it's just gonna be a pure benefit to your team. However, it's also way easier to hit barriers while you're trying to do this because you really don't need to aim all that much to hit a barrier. They're gigantic. So while you're healing your team, you can help to break the enemy barriers by simply tapping on the attack button. So you have your Reinhardt or your Orisa in front of you, and you're holding down the heal in order to keep them alive. And then while you're doing that, you just keep tapping that attack button, and you're going to continue healing your team and damaging the enemy barrier at the same time. And as I showed you at the beginning, Baptiste damage is pretty good. So having that extra damage get poured into the enemy barrier helps break it way faster. I want to quickly bring up a little bit of a side issue here, and that's with Moira. Her pick rate among the upper bracket has dropped like a rock, and this is not just because the meta shifted, but also Moira got nerfed. Her healing went down to 65 per second. But barriers are not nearly as reliable as they were before, which means that players need to spread out a lot more. And if they're spread out, well, then Moira's healing is significantly less effective because she specializes in essentially healing teammates that are all grouped up. And if they're not grouped up, well, it doesn't work all that well. And the nerfs just make it even worse. Specifically, though, I wanted to show you guys about how much damage Moira can do, or more specifically, how little her damage is. Because I know when people talk about DPS support characters, a lot of times people think about Moira, but I wanted to show you this specifically to just kind of dispel any illusions you might have. Look at this. It takes Baptiste about 4 seconds to destroy that barrier. It takes Moira over 12 seconds. That's 3 times as long. And don't forget, against a player, Baptiste's attack can critical and Moira's can't. Also, and I need to throw this out there, Moira's attack is not a lock-on. I don't know how many times I have to prove this, and I still see other idiot YouTubers insisting on incorrectly calling it a lock-on when it's not. Just like with Winston, the appearance of a lock-on is a purely visual effect that does not reflect the actual mechanics of how the attack works. Moira's attack is closer to what Zarya or Symmetra have. The bending of it is just a visual thing. And I'm sorry that I have to mention that. It just frustrates me knowing that others keep deliberately putting out bad info on it. So anyways, the point of that little kind of rant there was the fact that, yeah, Baptiste can destroy the barriers faster. He can also get criticals on the players, and the supposed advantage that Moira would have of a lock-on doesn't actually exist. So if you want to use a DPS support, then Zenyatta or Baptiste are your picks. Let's get back on track though. One of the strongest abilities in the game is the Immortality field. While this has gone through a couple of nerfs recently, it's still ridiculously strong. The Immortality drone is basically a defensive ultimate that's on a 20-second cooldown, which is just as ridiculous as it sounds. In fact, in many situations, it's actually better than a defensive ultimate that you would get from Lucio or Zenyatta. Now, it doesn't mean that it's always better, but there are certain abilities, attacks, and situations where the Immortality drone will keep your team alive and the others won't. For example, a Diva ultimate or a Riptire will get stopped by the Immortality field, but if you have a Zenyatta with a Transcendence, that doesn't do anything. Your team is still going to get taken out by it. So there are situations where the Immortality drone is actually better than some of the defensive ultimates that you would traditionally see from the Zenyatta and the Lucio players. So the next big question, though, is when should you be using Baptiste? And the answer is just like with Hanzo in yesterday's previous video, pretty much all the time. Like, Baptiste has strong vertical mobility, allowing him to avoid many of the annoying ground DPS. The Immortality drone means that if he gets dived by someone like a Winston or Diva, Hammond, or whoever, then there's a pretty good chance he's going to be able to survive through it because the Immortality drone is going to buy you plenty of time in order to either escape or have your team come and support you. Now, if your team is running around and doing something more standard like a Reinhardt or Orisa, then as I talked about earlier, Baptiste is going to have very good healing for that. He also helps you with that shield break. And even if your team is running dive with Winston, Diva, or Hammond or whatever, then the range on Baptiste's healing is still quite good. It might not be as optimal as running an Ana for those super long range instant heals, but Baptiste is still pretty solid even though those situations. And again, Immortality drone, if you're diving into whatever, like your Winston and your Hammond are diving out there, you can always throw the Immortality drone over to where they are to give them even more survivability in that particular situation. And then, of course, we have his ultimate, the Amplification Matrix. It allows you and your team to absolutely tear through enemy barriers like they were tissue paper. It's so good that Amplification Matrix now acts as a zoning tool more than it ever did in the past. Yeah, before, if you had enough barriers in the way, then the Amplification Matrix could be considered a threat, but it wasn't really this massively... It's like, oh, okay, they put a window over there, but we got 2 barriers in the way, so it's not really that big of a deal. However, now, when the ultimate goes up, everyone on the other team needs to make sure that they get out of the way, and they are nowhere in that line of sight for that window that Baptiste just put up, because otherwise they will get destroyed very quickly along with any barriers that were in the way. So aside from the damage boosting and healing boosting properties of the Amplification Matrix, the mere presence of that window now acts as a zoning tool, which is pretty good. Also, the Amplification Matrix charges up pretty fast, meaning that Baptiste will have frequent use of it. It's not something that you need to save up and hold on to like a Zenyatta ultimate or a Lucio ultimate. When you get that Amplification Matrix, you pretty much just use it within the next, 10 or 15. Like, if you're getting it and the fight is still going on, then you can just drop it right in the middle of that fight. You don't really have to worry because he's going to build it so quickly. Now, I know many of you watching this video are probably DPS players because most people in Overwatch are DPS players. There's just more of them. And for that reason, you've experienced some problems with the queue times. So, if you're tired of waiting 15 or 20 minutes for those queues in order to get into a match, here's a suggestion for you. Why don't you try queuing up as support and play Baptiste instead? Maybe you're a McCree or a Soldier or Ashe player or something like that, and you don't want to wait that 20 minutes, try queuing up for support. Now, I do need to emphasize that if you play Baptiste, you need to heal your team. Let me say that again. You need to heal your team. Don't try to be one of those DPS Moira players that simply ignores healing your team. You can't do that. You still need to heal, but at the same time, playing Baptiste means that you have one of the best hit scan damage dealers in the entire game. So when your team doesn't need to be healed, you can actually put out a whole lot of that pew 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 and get all of those big flashy eliminations and play the games and all that other stuff. So it's just something for you to consider. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if many of the upper bracket or higher skill or even pro and semi-pro players that would normally use those hit scan DPS end up switching over and using Baptiste. If your aim is good and you're able to master the relatively simple recoil of Baptiste's attack, I mean, it's not like it's anything on the level of CSGO where you have to actually memorize a pattern. With Baptiste, you just move the crosshair a little bit down, and congratulations, you've now countered the recoil of his attack. It's not super difficult, and again, like the whole weaving in the attack during the healing thing, it's something that you just kind of get used to, and you do it automatically without even thinking about it. So like I said, if you're a DPS tired of those super long queue times, maybe you should give it a try. Queue up as support, play Baptiste. Just remember, you have to heal your team, otherwise, well, you're gonna end up losing. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see more, subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss anything. Also, come hang out in my Discord server and my Twitch live stream. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to see what kind of cool VIP rewards you can get, check the links down below. And remember, always blame the controller, because it's never your fault.